That's in Fullerton, right? Eddie and Barbara and their family are here, and Michael and Cindy and their families here. Sherry and Randy are in Tahoe enjoying the week. This is their week of their vacation, and
Oh, that's nice.
so I talked to them last night, and they're having an excellent time. Weather's good. Hopefully, maybe this time next year, David and Kathy can be with us, and we hope they will be. We want to make this tape so that the grandkids can know a little more about Mother's history and where she's from, a little bit of things about her, and maybe we could start off with ask her some questions, and she could give us some answers and kind of go into it that way. And you were born in Trenton, Missouri, right?
Yes.
On a farm or in a house or what?
No, in a house on North Main.
North Main Street.
What year was that?
1895.
1895.
1895.
Was it raining?
Yes, it was a rented house. Little.
No. Was it raining outside when you were born?
Oh, no.
No, you remember. Do you have, how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have 4 sisters and 2 brothers. My sister and brother, Nelson and Lenny, they died before I was born. I never knew them.
And Aunt Mary, Mary was the oldest.
Aunt Mary was the oldest.
And how much older was she than you?
And then she's about 13 years older than I am. She was oldest, and Lenny was the next, and then Nelson, and then Edith, then me, and then my brother, Walter.
And Walter's still alive, but he's not very well.
Still alive.
Right.
He's 91.
91.
But he's not well. He's in the rest home.
And were you raised in Trenton, or did
No,
you?
when I was 5 years old, the folks moved to Oklahoma. My daddy went through with a covered wagon and left my mother and us children. And when he got through, he got a little house in Perkins,
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, and he had us to come and move in. And
Did he farm, or?
I was 5 years old. No, it was in town, a little town. Streets were not paved, just a little town. And there was a little house on this corner, and across the street on this corner was a church. So one morning my mother got to looking for me, and she couldn't find me. She found me sitting over there on the church steps. I said I wanted to hear them sing. And we didn't stay there too long then. And my father had rented this big 160 acres. He'd leased it for 5 years. So that's where we moved.
He was a farmer then?
He was a farmer.
Where was he from? Do you know anything about him and where he was from, your
I
father?
don't know much about my daddy.
What was his name?
Marcus Lafayette.
And what was your mother's name?
Alice Caroline.
You don't know where your mom was from either?
No, she was born in Missouri. I know she did, because Grandma Barn was where Grandma Barn lived.
And Grandma Barham is the one that's the bald-headed woman I've seen the picture of?
Yes.
Okay.
I wish I could remember, because Mommy told me what happened, what caused Grandma to lose her hair, but I don't remember.
She used to smoke
But I remember
Did
seeing
she smoke
her.
the corncob pipe? Did she
Yes.
know?
That's all the memory that I have of Grandma. My mother visited there just before we come to Oklahoma. And my Aunt Becky had never been married. That was my mother's oldest sister. She's still living with Grandma. And Grandma was sitting behind a heating stove, an old-fashioned stove. And there was a bed in this corner, and there was a bed in that corner, little old house. And she smoked a pipe, and she had a red handkerchief tied on her head. And Aunt Becky helped my mother bundle us kids up to go home because it was cold. That's all the memory I've got of my grandma.
Were you, how long did you stay in Oklahoma? And did you go to school there, or?
Yes, we did. Papa rented this Ferguson place. It was 160 acres. Mary and Charles lived with us for quite a while. They were there when Liddy was born. And we went to school. We had to go 2.5 miles to school. But we'd cut through Mr. Funnell's farm through here, made it a little bit closer. But we had to cross the creek on a log. If we'd have went around the road, we'd have had a little bridge over the creek. But we crossed over. So that day at school, it just rained all day. I remember that. So when we got to the creek to come home, it was out of bank. It was just, oh, it was just rolling with water. My mother was coming down the lane because she was so afraid we'd try to venture to cross. She had real long dress and she was barefooted and she was holding her dress. I can see her today. Just seemed so natural. She was scared, so she went back and told Mr. Funnel. And you know what? He came down on the horse and he swam the horse across and got Lena. And then he swam the horse over and got me. And then he swam back and got Edith. And the creek was going so fast the horse didn't go straight. Did it kind of take it down a little bit. I never was so scared in my life.
Oh, I thought you probably enjoyed that.
Oh, I was scared.
Don't take after Eddie, then, do you?
We were barefooted and we tied them together and had them around our neck. I was scared. I don't remember if we went to school the next day or not, I don't know. But if we'd have come around the road, we'd have had a bridge over the creek, but we'd been cutting through, and so that's what we did. We didn't know the creek would be out.
How many years of schooling did you have?
Huh?
How many years of schooling did you have?
I went to the 8th grade.
To
I just got to the 8th grade.
Uh-huh.
We went to that school about a year and a half, and Edith kept getting in fights with one of the boys that come home, so Papa took us out of that school and put us in Parkland. Now we had to go 3 miles to school, and we went there then until the 5 years was up on the place, and then Papa bought 80 acres about 10 miles west, and we moved up there.
You know what land sold for then, by any chance?
Huh?
You know how much property sold for then? How much an acre or anything?
No, I know.
Remember?
I don't know.
Now, which place was it that you picked cotton?
Yeah, I picked cotton there, both places.
Oh,
I raised cotton both places.
did you have a cotton gin?
No, but we take the cotton to the gin at Chandler, Oklahoma.
And how much did the bags that you go out in the field and pick cotton, how much did the bags weigh, or how big were they, or did you?
Well, he tried to get 1,600 pounds to take in the wagon. We'd pick it and put it, had a strap over our shoulder, and we'd pick it and put it in that sack. And we'd get about what we thought we could carry, then we'd take it in and weigh it and empty it. And then somebody'd get in them up in the wagon and tromp it down. So we tried to get 1,600 in it for a load to go to the gin.
Did you get paid for it when you picked it like that, or you just worked for your
We
dad?
didn't get paid for my daddy.
You didn't, huh?
No, I got the pennies. I remember asking for the pennies.
What do you mean the pennies?
The pennies that he'd have when he'd take a load in and sell it, what
Oh.
pennies he'd get.
Okay. And what would you do with the pennies?
I don't remember.
You probably saved them like you do
I didn't
then.
get more, maybe 1 and 2 at a time. I don't remember. But anyway,
You said something about Edith getting in a fight with the boys.
Yeah.
How about your boyfriends or her boyfriends? You know anything about them?
I was too little. I could have been about 7. I wasn't over 7, I don't think, at that time.
What did you do after you finished 8th grade?
Well, I went back to Missouri with Joe Criswell. He was staying with us for a while. That was my father's brother's boy.
Your cousin.
And visited Mary and stayed with her a while. I went back home, and we just worked on the farm, had to help put it in, help plant the cotton. We chopped cotton.
This is
we
back in
picked
Oklahoma you're
cotton.
talking about, or in Missouri.
When they'd cut, we raised capricorn and milo May. We never raised no regular corn. And Papa had a sled that 2 could sit on it, and was a knife here. And I'd sit here and I'd drive the horse, and Papa'd sit here and he'd catch the corn as it cut. And it'd go just about so far, and then he had a shock, and then he would shock it. I remember doing that just about every fall, helping them. And then when I left home, Walter did. He'd drive the horse and go through with him. But I stayed home. I went back to Missouri and stayed with Mary when Alice was born. And I think I was about 19 then. And then I went back home. I didn't like it in Oklahoma like I did in Missouri, and I wanted to go back. And so I went back to Missouri.
Who did you stay with then when you
When
went
I went
back?
back to Missouri, Mary got me a job of keeping house. I wanted to keep house for somebody. And Dr. Rooks lived on this side of 14th Street, and Judge Hall lived on this side, and they were older people. And Miss Bird Hall, that was their daughter. She'd never been married. She's about 60 years old. She lived with them. So I chose that place because there wasn't any children to have to take care of. They were older people, but I had a lot more work to do because I had a friend, Sybil Mitchell. She worked for Dr. Rooks, and she didn't have to work as hard as I did because they had such a big house. Every Monday I had to wash, and every Tuesday I had to iron. And Wednesday was just a little bit of everything. Thursday I'd clean upstairs. Friday I'd clean downstairs. And Saturday it was a little bit of everything. I baked the pies, but I never had to bake a cake. Miss Bird always baked the cakes. And I was staying there when I was 21. That's why I remember my 21st birthday so well. Miss Bird told me that evening, she said, Si and I we're thinking about going to Chillicothe tonight. Would you like to go as far as your sisters and stay? Of course, I wanted to go, and I did. And when we got just about there, well, Si, that's the young man that was taking singing lessons, and he was spending a few weeks there in Trenton, and so he was visiting the halls. And him and Bird would sing sometimes together. He wanted a drink. And I never thought anything about it. Bird pulled up in front of the house, and I went hurrying in to get a pitcher of water. And I went in the kitchen, and I called Mary, and she wasn't in there and didn't answer. And then I went to the dining room door, opened it, and there it was just full of people.
Oh.
That was the end of our trip. We didn't. They wasn't intending to go to Chillicothe in the first place. But
It was
I
a
never
surprise
thought about
birthday party.
it never entered my mind. I could have thought, well, they didn't say they was going to Chillicothe. We're thinking about going to Chillicothe, and would you like to go? So they didn't story to me because they didn't go. I never caught on at all.
The first time I heard that one.
I was 21 then.
On the farm, when you're picking cotton, did you have farm animals like cows and chickens and everything
We had
else?
cows and chickens and pigs. Mommy had geese. We never had no ducks. We never had no turkeys.
So you raised the things you ate most. You didn't
Yes,
like
we did. We just had about everything you could imagine. We raised on the farm. I know sometimes we'd go to Chandler. That was a big treat to go to Chandler. That's where Papi took the cotton to the cotton gin. And he'd buy cheese and crackers. And that was a big treat to us. We'd sit we had a spring wagon. It was kind of like a buggy, but it was a two-seated buggy. And we'd sit in there and we'd eat our cheese and crackers, and I don't know what we had to drink. That was a treat because we never had cheese and crackers on the farm, cheese. But sometimes he'd buy a great big box of crackers. You'd get them in a great big box. They were bigger square crackers than we get now. But that was a big treat because we'd have cheese and crackers. It must have been about 5 or 6 miles to Chandler, something like that. I don't remember just how far it was.
And something I've always wanted to ask, you went to the Baptist, where you met Dad, was the Baptist church in Montebello. Aunt Mary always went to the Christian church. How come? What was the reason?
My parents were Baptist.
Your parents were Baptist?
Yeah, they were Baptist. We used to go to church at Parkland when we lived on the Figerson place. We attended church there. And my Aunt Melissa, one of my mother's sisters, she only lived about a mile from Parkland. And my daddy and Aunt Melissa would both get up and shout at church. And I never seen my mother shout, but I seen my daddy shout.
What would he shout?
That was the Baptist church there. And then after we moved up on the other place, we attended church in Kearney, Oklahoma. But it was a country church that we went south. I can't remember the name of it. Brother Sharp was the preacher there. And then they had a big tabernacle meeting. And that's where I accepted the Lord. I was there one night.
How old were you?
I was 12 years old.
At 12?
And the minister's daughter's name was Lois, and we were both good friends. We were the only two that was baptized. We were baptized one Sunday afternoon. And I don't know whether it was running water or not. I know it was more kind of like a big pond or something. And Mary had made me some little slippers to put on my feet. I didn't want to get them dirty, but I hated awful bad. They was pretty. They was made out of fleece line something and little pink rosettes on them. But I put them on and warm in the water. And Lydia cried because she thought they were going to drown me. She thought they were going to drown me.
They used to dunk them
She
back then,
remembers
those
that.
days,
Lydia remembers when I was baptized because she said she cried. I didn't see her cry, but she told me she cried because she thought they were going to drown me.
Now, why did Aunt Mary out in the Christian church? That's what I was going to ask.
Huh?
Aunt Mary went to the Christian church. How come she attended the Christian church?
I think Charles and the Fosters belonged to the Christian church.
I see.
And she went to the Christian church with them.
I didn't know that.
But my folks had always been Baptist.
Now you had said too that you remember your pappy singing.
Who?
Your dad.
Or
He
you sang?
sang. Can you tell us a little bit about that memory?
Well, you know, he sang. Well, that was only when he was a shouting.
What do you mean? What do you mean shouting? What's
Oh,
that?
he'd just clap his hand, go back and forth. this
Amen,
way,
holy,
across-
like,
yeah, across
like a
the-
holy roller?
Well, he never got down and rolled. He always stood on his feet.
Did.
But he was just so happy. He just gets so happy, him and that minister go
great?
and they just clap their hands and go back and forth.
Yeah.
But my mother never did. My mother never did shout. I never did see her.
Now you got to tell them a little bit about. You told me before, but tell them about how you met Dad and what on the first time.
Oh, well, I was keeping house for the Halls, and we had a meeting going on at the Baptist church. We was on 14th Street. It was about 2 blocks, wasn't it, down to the library, down to Main?
I think so.
And then from Main on down to the Baptist church was 2 more blocks.
That's
You
really,
you didn't have to be afraid then. A single girl could go out by herself and she was safe. There wasn't nothing happened like it is now. So I was going to church every night.
was it
and,
revival or something, or was it?
Yeah,
Oh,
it was protracted meeting then. I think we called them then.
a what?
And I was coming out, and Dad was here in the vestibule. And he stepped up and wanted to know if he could walk me home. And I said, no thanks, I wouldn't let him go. But I didn't know he followed me. He told me after we were married, I guess, he said he followed me to see where I lived. I didn't know it. And then it was a few nights after that, it was to church again, and there he was again, but the lights was out. The street lights were out. I thought, well, I'm afraid to go in the dark, and I'm afraid to go with him, but I let him walk me home.
Had he shot him out with his BB gun or something
If the
before?
lights had been on, I don't suppose I'd let him walk me home. But I thought it was dark. I was afraid to go anyway.
What'd you talk about?
But Halls went to the Methodist church. So
Where
then
was this at? Montebello?
No,
No, this is
Misery.
still in
Misery.
Trenton.
Trenton, Missouri.
Now, do you think of
then
those?
During the meeting, then, I would walk down to the library. You know where the library was on the corner. And Uri would come across the track, and he would meet me there, and then we'd go to church. And Mrs. Hall found out that I was meeting him there, and she said he had to come to the house and get me. So I couldn't meet him there.
So he had to walk another 4
He had
blocks
to
to meet
walk
you.
on down and get me.
Okay.
That's the
I
right
could have
thing
walked
to
down the
do.
library and
Right
met him, but she thought that wasn't right for me to meet him. She said he had to come
Well, had
down.
you seen him at church at all before that first time he asked you to walk you home, or had he been in your Sunday school class
I've
or
never
anything?
seen him. I didn't know him.
You
When
didn't
he
know him at
walked-
all?
No,
Didn't know what
I'd
his
never
name was
seen
or
him.
anything?
I'd never seen him. I didn't know who he was. When he asked to walk me home the first night, if he could walk me home, and I said no, I didn't know who he was.
Had he tried any other girls and they refused him first, or
I don't
you
know.
know?
I don't know.
I don't know, never told you.
But I didn't know him. I wouldn't let him go. I guess I wouldn't have let him go with me that night if the lights had been on, but I was afraid it was dark.
How much did you get paid at the halls for
I got
housekeeping?
$3 a week.
And room and board?
She'd give me a Saturday night off once in a while, and I'd go out to Mary's and stay all night, and then Mary'd take me back Sunday evening.
So you had Sunday off, really? Sunday you didn't have to work?
I didn't get to go every Sunday, but once in a while. I worked on Sunday when I didn't go out to Mary's, but once in a while she'd let me have Sunday off, and I'd go home with them on Saturday evening.
And how soon after?
But after I got married, Dad didn't think they was giving me enough, and so I told Mrs. Hall, and she said I was afraid of that, and they gave me 50 cents more. I got 3.5.
A week?
3.5 a week. That was 50 cents a day.
Oh.
But I got my board in my room.
How long after Dad met you did you get married, and a little bit about that?
Well, he told me that after we went together a while, he said he's something he wanted to ask me when he found out if he had to go into service. But then you see he was already enlisted, and so they called him in, but he didn't ask me.
Well,
But he kept wanting to come home on a furlough. He could get a furlough, but he wouldn't come home unless I'd get married. And his mother wanted him to come, so I agreed to get married so he'd come home so we'd all get to see him.
but wasn't he in William Jewell College then or something?
Yeah, he went 2 years to William Jewell College, studied to be a doctor. But then you see the service got him. The railroad kept him on the payroll, and he never lost his seniority from the time he first started. When he'd go to school in the winter, they kept his seniority, and then he'd work on the railroad in the summer when he came home. And he did it when he went in the service. Railroad give him his seniority when he come back from the service.
Why
He
didn't he
still
go?
had his seniority and went back to work for the railroad.
Why didn't he go back to school after the service, or did he ever?
Why didn't he? He didn't have no money to go on.
Oh.
He had a wife to take care of.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't get to go back to school. He worked for part of his tuition. He washed dishes, and he worked to help pay part of his tuition. I remember him telling me that.
Tell us about your wedding and your honeymoon.
Huh?
Tell us about your wedding and your honeymoon.
We didn't have a honeymoon then. We didn't, because he just had 5-day furlough. And he came home that day. And then the next day we were married in his mother's house. And we went home with Mary that night and stayed all night with them that night. And she had all the Newkirks, all the family out to the farm then for dinner that day. And we went back and stayed at his mother's that night, and he had to leave the next day. And Florence and Winfield, that was his brother, went as far as Kansas City with me. I went with him to Kansas City, and we left him there. He had to go back to the camp, and we went back home.
What year did you get married?
Huh?
What year did you get married?
1918.
1918.
1918,
And what was your anniversary date?
Huh?
What's your
January.
anniversary date? The date of your
20th of
marriage.
January, wasn't it?
I didn't hear you.
Your anniversary is 20th of January?
My anniversary?
When did you get married? What day did you get married?
January the 3rd.
The 3rd.
January
3rd.
3rd, 1918. But while he was at camp, I visited him 2 times. He was stationed at Lawton, Oklahoma. And I made 2 trips down to visit him at the camp. And we'd have to go into Lawton to get a room to sleep. And one night, about 4 o'clock in the morning, someone come pounding on our door. And Dad had to get up and show that we were married. Because I guess the couples going in town weren't married. And it was about 4. I don't know what he had to show. I don't remember what he had to show that we were married.
But they knocked on your door?
In the middle of the
He
night?
pounded on our door about 4 o'clock in the morning.
When you were married?
It was a, what do you call them? The
Shore patrol or something?
Military police, or it was a policeman.
MPs, yeah.
Knocking on our doors. I don't know what he had. The next morning, and I would go on the truck with them. There was other soldiers that's come in town and stayed too, so that we went out on the truck. And it was awful cold. I thought I froze my feet. We got out to camp and got in the tent, and Dad took my shoes off and he rubbed my feet and worked it. I thought I'd frozen. It was so cold.
Now I know where you got that.
It
Where was
awful
this?
cold.
Where was the camp?
In
At
Lawton.
Lawton, Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. January, that'd be cool.
And when I was down at the camp when the troop train left. Oh, it was a big, long troop train. But they wouldn't let me, I couldn't, they were going right through Trenton, going home back to New York. But I couldn't go with him. So then I went on, took the train, went on up to Oklahoma and visited my folks for a few days before I went back to Missouri.
When did he ship out? Do you remember?
It was in April. I don't remember the day, but it was in April.
And where was he sent to?
I don't remember.
France.
He was in France, I think, most of the time. I remember, I know he was in the Argonne battle, if you know what that one is, if you read anything about that, the Argonne battle. And he had written me a letter, and he'd lost it on the battlefield, and some soldier found it. So he put it in another envelope and just addressed it, and he just wrote a little note and told me that he found it, but he couldn't tell me anything about Dad. He didn't know what had happened to him. So I thought maybe, you know, something had, I was feeling awful bad. But finally I got a letter from him, and he was okay. He was in the hospital corps. He never had to go out and shoot anybody. He would have to go out on the
battlefield and get wounded,
battlefield and pick up the wounded and bring them in. Sometimes he'd say that they'd have to dart into a shell hole to keep from getting hit. And we know that's where he got shell shocked, but you know, he wouldn't admit anything on his discharge papers. He wanted it clean, that's why he never wasn't so lucky to get a pension, was never service connected. Because he doctored himself if ever he was in the hospital corps, and he just took care of himself when he got sick. I guess he didn't get real sick or anything while he was over there, but he was shell shocked.
He never wanted to talk about that. Or the service goes, so
He was gone for 2
You
years.
want to hear about it? I'm going to ask him.
Grandma, was it for 2 years that he was in the service, or for 4?
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't in the service much over a year.
Oh.
He was. The war ended. See, he was married in 18. The war ended in 1919.
Tell me about the day the war ended.
The what?
The day the war ended. What did you do when you found out the war was over?
Well, I was living with Mary. See, after we got married, I was working for Halls. And I guess I worried too much or something. Anyway, I got sick. I was to church that night. I was with his folks, and I got sick. And they wouldn't let me go back, didn't want me to go back and work anymore. So I didn't. And I stayed there till I got to feel better, and then I went out to the farm, and I stayed with Mary till he come home. And I got a call. Mary was out doing the chores. I don't know where I was at, but I got a call. It must have been about 7 o'clock in the morning. And they were in New York. And he told me what time they'd be in Hannibal, was that the name of the town about halfway to Kansas City? Hannibal?
Hamilton, was it? I don't know.
He told me what time they'd be through there, and he wanted me to meet him. So there were several of us women. We met the train. And I hadn't found Dad yet, but Miss Lohman did. She went along down the train, and she found Uri went on down the train. But I got to ride on the train, and he went to St. Joe. And we stayed at St. Joe that night. And we sat up till 4 o'clock in the morning to get a bed. They were all taken, and he told us that this one room was rented, but if they didn't show up, we could have it. But we waited till 4 o'clock in the morning. And then he was supposed to get up and go somewhere and drill that day, but he didn't go drill because we didn't get to bed. He was too tired, and he said he drilled so much that he didn't go. That was St. Joe, Missouri.
1919, and what was the date he came home?
Well, the war was ended on the 11th, wasn't it?
November 11th?
The 11th of November, but he didn't get to come home till the next April. I think he came home.
April of 1919 he came home.
Okay. That's now.
And when was David born? I'm trying to figure things out here now.
David was born 1920.
What month?
March the 14th.
That sounds like St. Joseph to me.
Close.
He came home. While he was gone, I'd bought a few things. Mary told me anything that I seen a bargain for to buy, I could put it in this room upstairs, the south room upstairs. So I had bought a table, and I bought some chairs, and I bought a chest of drawers. They was a good bargain, and I got them, but we got this little 4-room house up on the north part of town where we were going to live. Just had 4 rooms, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room.
No bath.
I can't even remember. It was a little short street. I can't remember this big street. I want to say Halliburton, but it wasn't Halliburton because that's the one went through there by the little rock church, wasn't it?
I believe
It
so.
was the other side of Titcomb's, there on 17th Street. It was the same street that the Brainerd School was on. You remember where the Brainerd School was? What street it
You're
was
taxing my memory. I may, another 20
But
years I
there's
can
a
remember it,
little
but right
short
now I
street
don't
through
remember.
here that we lived, and we rented the house from Davidson's.
Okay.
And that's where David was born, 19 and 20.
And
he put that house up for sale while I was in bed with David. And we had the first chance to buy it, and that was our mistake. We should have bought it. But Dad wanted to build his own house.
he was still working for the, he went to work for the railroad as soon as he got out of the service in.
Huh?
He worked for the railroad when he got out of the service in.
They still had his seniority, still had his job, and I had an annual pass. I could ride the railroad anywhere I wanted to go. But he never wanted to go anywhere with me. He never went very much. Of course, working, there didn't have much chance to go.
So when did you start building the house in
Well, after David was born.
Cross Street?
We lived with his folks that summer. Moved in there, I think, and lived there a while.
So, but you said Dad helped Everett build his house before you built your house, right?
No, we had ours first.
Oh, did you?
He built on, we built 3 rooms, then he built the other 3 rooms on. And that was after he quit the railroad, and he quit the railroad. And he thought he wanted to do carpenter work. So he built Everett's house, and he built Nate Cunningham's house. That was a big 2-story house. That's about all the work he got to do. Dad was awful slow. He did good work, but he was awful slow about his work. Ed McReynolds would go all around him putting it up. He was fast. He got most of the carpenter jobs.
How many days a week did he work? 6 or 7?
On the railroad.
Uh-huh. And
5 days on the railroad. His checks was $54 for 2 weeks' work when we were married. And when it'd come, there was 31 days in the month, and there was an extra day. His check would be $56. I don't know how we lived on it, but we did because everything was so cheap. And we run a grocery bill at Depew's little grocery store just on the other side of the bridge on 9th Street. Sometimes our grocery bill would only be $13 for 2 weeks. But we raised everything. We had a big garden. I just had a big garden and just raised a lot of stuff. And things were cheap, and you could buy fruit from people in the fall. They'd sell fruit, strawberries or all kinds of fruit, and you could buy it up. And,
did you can a lot?
oh, I canned a lot. One year the people lived back of Skinner's, that was about a block and a half from us. They had a big apple orchard, so they gave away all the apples that fell. I canned 100 quarts of apples that year. They'd give them away, and Dad would go and pick them up.
100 quarts?
Yeah, I did. I canned lots of tomatoes, used to can green beans and canned corn and all our pickles. And
I can remember tomatoes, tomato juice,
tomato.
Ketchup,
we'd make ketchup.
tomato pudding, tomato bread pudding. We lived on tomatoes, I can remember.
Canned everything, had everything. Mary had lots of strawberries, you know, and she'd sell them just real dirt cheap. I bought lots of strawberries. Strawberry jam put up. Our living didn't cost us so much. Well, we couldn't afford to buy everything.
Now, Aunt Mary's children, like Alice and they used to come in town to go to high school, and they'd stay with you in town. So is that right? That's how they
stayed
lived
with me. After Poppy died, Alberti stayed with Mary. And Mother didn't have no income. They didn't have no Social Security then or anything. Mother didn't have no income. So she had to sell a place. So then Alberti stayed with me till she graduated. That was just 1 year. She stayed with me the last year of high school.
And then when did Walter and Grace move in with you? That was later, I guess.
I don't remember what year that was, but that was after you were born.
Yeah, I remember that.
How old was you?
About 2 years old.
3 years old? Was you 3 years old? Do you remember her?
Oh, I remember Aunt Grace, but I don't remember when I was 2 years old, no. You told me enough about it, I remember it, though. Yeah.
But anyway,
She was my favorite aunt.
you didn't like to stay with her. You wouldn't stay with her. I'd leave you with her sometimes when I would be going to work. And I think she punished you one time, made you sit in the corner or something. She said you was riding your kitty car around. It was annoying her or something. I don't remember, but you wouldn't stay with her after that at all. I started to work one morning, Walter was with me, and looked back and you was coming to crying, and you had your coat on one arm in your coat and the rest of your coat was a dragging. And I took you down to Grandpa's Newkirk's and I left you there. And I went on to work and then come back by and got you.
What kind of work did you do then?
Well, I worked at the poultry house and I broke eggs at the farmer's co-op, they called it. For said I worked 4 years in the laundry for 18 cents an hour. And I couldn't buy our groceries on that, so I got a family's washing or two and done it at home. But they caught up with me. The boss knew that I was, and he thought I was, what do you call it on the company? I got laid off.
Because you were taking business from him by doing washing at
from
home.
the laundry. I guess the truck drivers maybe would see it on the clothesline, I don't know, but somebody reported that I was doing washings at home. He didn't like it, and so I went to work that Saturday morning, and the office girl, she told me to work hard today, hard as you can. Well, I worked hard every day. I had the hardest job, I think, in the laundry. I had to run the tumbler, and I had to dry everything. I do all the starching. I had all the blankets to dry. I had all the curtains to do. I had the hardest job in there. But he laid me off that evening. But I wasn't laid off too long till I got a letter from him, and he wanted me to come back to work for him. If I'd work in interest to the laundry, I wouldn't have worked for him for $100 a week.
I bet you would have.
No, I wouldn't.
$100 a week, a lot of money then, Mom.
Yeah,
No,
but
that's
I
her
don't know.
pride.
I was mad at
the
him.
pride comes in every deal.
He laid me off, and I worked so hard anyway. But at 18 cents an hour, you didn't. If I'd have worked a full 40 hours, I wouldn't quite had $10. It'd have been 9 something for the full week. And one day he thought that the four of us, we'd stayed over a half an hour longer than we ought to, because we was all four short 9 cents. That was a half hour. We were short 9 cents. So the Chillicothe driver, he'd bring the laundry from the hotel, he'd bring it up in the morning, and then he'd just lay over there till it was washed and ready to go back, so he didn't have to make 2 trips. So he'd always kind of lounge around in the office at the lunchtime, so we got him, we couldn't look on the book, but he could, so we got him to look on the book. Sure enough, there he took 9 cents off all 4 of us. That's how little he was. He thought we'd all stayed a half an hour longer than we should have.
So you always worked. After you got married, you always worked?
No, I didn't work at first. I didn't.
Not in the beginning?
Until Dad couldn't work.
And how old was David, my brother, when Dad couldn't work anymore? Remember?
I don't remember how old he was. He wasn't too old. We got a job. He didn't have no work either. It was after he quit the railroad, after he quit. And
Why couldn't he work
the
anymore?
lady across the street from my Mother Newkirk, she was working at Swift's. So she said I could get on over there. I wouldn't go unless Dad'd go with me. So he stayed a half a day. We went over there, and he stayed a half a day, and we come out at noon. We was going to have lunch at his mother's. He'd come out at noon with his clothes. He wasn't going back. He didn't go back. So then I asked him, would he go back with me and get mine? I'd go back and get my clothes. So I went back, so we didn't quit. Well, then the lady across the street had said I could get on down to the co-op. So then I did down there, and I picked chickens for a long time. I got 3 cents a chicken.
What does that mean, pick chickens?
Well, we
Pick the
picked
feathers.
chicken, pick the feathers off.
Oh.
They had men that would stick them, you know. They're told somehow they'd stick them. They hang them up on a shackle. There was a shackle would hold 5 chickens. So you'd go get a shackle with 5 chickens and you'd hang it up here. And if they were stuck just right, all you had to do was just do like this and knock the feathers off. But if they didn't get them stuck right, the feathers wouldn't come off so good. We got 3 cents a chicken. Stella Ross and I, we was about the best pickers they had. We made $3 one day. We picked 100 chickens.
Chickens in one day?
And then I broke eggs in the co-op. That was the last job I had before I come back here, come to California.
Michael wanted to know why you had to work. What about Dad?
Huh?
Michael wanted to know why you had to work, why Dad wasn't working.
Well, I had to work to live.
Well, but why didn't, what was he about, he didn't know about Dad being ill.
No, Dad was sick all the time.
What was wrong with him?
Well, he had these terrible head pains. He had about everything wrong with him, Eddie. He never worked a day after Social Security come in. He had to quit the railroad because he just couldn't stay with it. Well, what I mean, he couldn't stay to work enough to make a living, and he just quit. They wouldn't keep him. He'd get sick on the job. He'd come home in the night, or in the middle of the week, he'd come home. He was sick. He couldn't work.
Had tremendous head pains. Had trigeminal neuralgia, and they injected alcohol into. So that's what he used to do to kill the facial nerve.
He was shell-shocked.
And he used to cry out of one eye. I remember that one until he'd be in so much pain, it'd just be one eye be just tears be going down, being so much he'd be quivering. He was in pain. And he'd had these. They did 2 or 3 operations on his sinuses and cut a lot of bones out of his sinus here. That may have done more damage, or who knows. But that time they did what they thought they could do to relieve the pressure and stuff. But I'd heard at one time he got hit on the railroad, and also then he said he was shell-shocked in the war. But we really don't know what did cause it, but it was a nervous disorder that started. Then by taking so much pain medicine and stuff, I just tore up his stomach. And he had probably about 3 major stomach operations. Had a vagotomy one time, I know. It was one of the surgeries he had.
That's the vagus nerve.
Yeah, they cut that. They thought that would help him some. And then he used to get, he had a lot of arthritis, neuritis. He just suffered a lot of pain. He'd take 1,000 aspirins a month, or just took aspirin about handfuls.
Yeah, just about everything wrong
About every
with
2 hours
him.
he'd take a couple of aspirin, day and night.
He spent most of his time in the Veterans Hospital.
He wasn't home then. The part I remember, Dad was never home when I was growing up. He was away in the hospital. It was a rare occasion I'd see him. He'd come home, because we couldn't go see him, and didn't have the money to go see him. But he'd just sort of like every year or 2, he'd come home for a week or 2, maybe. And,
Well, you and Lois lived in San Gabriel. Where did you live? He went out. He wanted to fix the garage door.
well, that's after we're out here, after I was married. Yes, you're talking about
Yeah,
that. I'm
that's
talking about when he was growing up.
Grandma?
He was home more after I was married with you out here, I think, any other time I remember in my life, and being home that much.
Grandma, but you had more than just 2 sons. You also had a daughter?
Yeah, we had a little baby girl.
When was she born?
She was born in 21. David was born in March 19 and 20. And then in November the 3rd, 21, Blanche was born. And she was awful pretty little baby. She was just awful pretty baby, but she only lived 3 months. She got pneumonia, and she died.
And then you had Russell.
I didn't have Russell then until about 7 years. I forget what year you were born now.
28, I remember. I remember that. July the 31st,
July the
28.
31st, yeah.
28, yeah.
Well, you're the one here to help her
Right.
remember.
Because there was 8 years between the boys, but Blanche was born in 21 between, but I went from the time Blanche died, I went 7 years, and then the Lord gave me Russell. And he's been a blessing to me ever since. I can thank the Lord for Russell.
So your oldest son, David, after he finished high school, did he go into the service then?
No, he finished high school, and that was when the Depression was so bad, didn't have anything, so they had the CC camps, and people that
That was Civil
Needed
Conservation Corps they had then.
was,
for young
the
people.
son was eligible to go in the CC, so David went in the CC camp for 2 years, and he was stationed in Nevada and Utah. Ely, Nevada was one place, and I don't remember what.
Ogden, Utah.
Yeah, Ogden, Utah. He was stationed there 2 years, but he had to send most of his money home for David, Russell and I to live on. And after he came home then, he wanted to go back. But he came in one night, and Dad was due to go back to Kansas City at the hospital the next morning. So Dad didn't want him to go back to Utah. He wanted him to stay there. Said, Mother and Russell need you, so he didn't go back to Utah. He stayed there. Well, you know, he couldn't hardly get any work to do. There wasn't much to do. And then, but he could work on WPA.
What's that?
Well, that's work that they had for people during the Depression that needed
Government-sponsored
WPA.
work.
I forget what they called
Build roads and parks
Oh,
and things like that.
it. But
It was
Russell,
relief,
I don't blame
relief type
David.
work, but
He
you
was
got paid
he
for
was
it.
proud. He didn't want to do it. I don't
Something
blame him at
everybody
all.
couldn't get on until he.
But I went down to the sewing room, down to the courthouse. They had sewing for women, but they wouldn't let me work because I had an eligible son, and I didn't think that was right, because it wasn't David's place to support me. But they wouldn't let me work because I had an eligible son, but they would take David. Well, David didn't want to work on WPA, and I don't blame him because he had pride. He was a young man, and he had pride. But my Sunday school teacher, Helen Hall, she came out and talked to him. You see, David drove the truck quite a bit of the time when he was in the CC camp, and he liked that. So Helen came out and she talked to him, and she said she'd give him the truck driving where he'd deliver on the truck, but he didn't have to work like a laborer on WPA. He could drive the truck. She talked him into agreeing and he'd do it. Well, of course, he had to support, had to get biggest part of his money, see, goes for support of the family, because that's why they had this WPA. And he did that for a while, and then I guess they took that off, and then she gave him the job as overseeing the recreation for the children in the hall uptown. And he liked that too, you know where that was at.
He was a basketball player.
Just, you know more about that, I guess, than I did about, so that's what he did up there then. We managed to get through somehow, but it was awful hard.
Then he eventually went to Kansas City.
Yeah, he went to Kansas City. He went to school. He went to it was the Ong aircraft where he got a job, wasn't it? They sent him to Kansas City, and they paid him.
They trained him how to repair, and
paid him. He
they
went
built,
to school,
yeah.
and then he got a job at the Ong aircraft, and that's where he was at when he got married. David was just a natural born mechanic. You know that. Your bicycle would play out on you, you'd put it in the basement, wait till David would come home and fix your bicycle. But he was just natural.
Dad worked with him when he was little.
David worked at the garage for a while. It was hard to get jobs when young people got out of school. There wasn't work in that town to do.
The reason I remember that because once I went to visit him, and he was in Kansas City, and we had a sidewalk at our house in Trenton, and it went in the front and around the side. And when I went down there, wherever David was at or something, he'd put the sidewalk in, I think, for this woman he was renting the room for. It looked like exactly the same sidewalk, you know, it was like it had been transplanted. So, and different things had happened. I know Dad got to work, he worked with Dad quite a bit. When he was growing up, Dad was home more, and he taught him carpenter work and different things. I mean, they worked together on some things. At least I always thought that, because they went together. Him and Dad got along real good together.
How tall is he?
He's at least 6'3", maybe 6'4". He did play basketball because when the CC camp, I remember seeing pictures he'd write about. He'd been on the regional teams and stuff like that. He was center on the team.
And the old peach baskets, huh?
Yeah, played a lot of basketball. I know he did. Yeah, he liked that. That's why I guess he got the recreational job probably there for a while.
Shall we take a break and have some birthday cake?
Yeah, sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Grandma, are you getting tired?
She's doing pretty good.
Easiest work she's done. Oh, I was supposed to put a click on this.
I don't want to wear you out. We still have to do
I think
birthday
you're doing
cake and
great, yeah.
stuff.
I ran out of questions here.
Well, that's why I got this, because it has questions in I thought I'd like to ask her and kind of jar my memory.
Okay.
I don't know how much.
Oh, okay. That's very nice.
Sit by her.
Oh, good. That's great.
Oh boy, Cindy, if you would have known you were going to be on here, you'd get, you know,
look great.
You notice how we put lipstick on just in case.
Well, it'd be fun. We could watch him then.
Yeah. Had to get a little higher there. So he's got that high hairdo there, you know, you gotta get her. Yeah.
That's who needs, yeah, Grandpa needs to be in the picture.
Oh, he doesn't. He's in the last year.
Okay. Now,
How do I get this to go the whole
I
way?
just
Wait a
got
second.
the 8th grade, I guess it was.
See, that's how I'm...
You want me to tell what happened after I got out of school?
tell me what happened when you got out of school, Grandma.
When I got out of school, well,
You gotta tell
we had
tell
lots of
Sherry.
work to do on the farm. And I kind of wanted to get a job of keeping house for somebody. I wanted to make a little bit of money. And Mama, she knew of this family lived at the edge of town. And they had a little girl and a little boy. And her husband was a salesman. He was just home on the weekends. So I decided that I'd work for her a while. And they had 2 cows and about half a dozen chickens, and they was in a pen. I had to feed the cows, and pump some water and water the cows. I had to milk the cows, and I had quite a bit to do. I didn't have to go ahead with the cooking, but I had to help with it, get it, the vegetables and things all ready, and to set the table, and so many things to do. So Saturday morning I was churning, and this little girl, she's about 9, I guess, or 10, and I didn't like her too well.
How old were you?
I was only about 14 and a half. Maybe I was 15 yet. Maybe I'd had my birthday. And she was telling me what all I had to do. And I remember when she was running kind of around my churning, and I didn't like her too well, so I told Mommy I didn't want to go back. They picked me up on Saturday to come get me. I didn't have to stay there on Sunday, and I didn't go back. I didn't go back to work for her no more.
Now, was that around Trenton?
I don't remember what I got, probably $1 for a week.
$1 for the
For a
week?
week?
Probably that's what I got, because when I went to work for Halls, I only got $3 in that big house, and had lots of work to do there. But of course, we had work at home to do. I was to help Mommy work in the garden, work in the field. And we had lots of fruits and lots of vegetables and things. So she knew this other place that they wanted a hired girl. And it was Grandpa and Grandma Stewart, and their daughter and her husband lived together. Their daughter was an invalid. And you know, I kind of, when I was growing up, I was kind of wishing that I could have been a nurse. So I went to work there for the 4 of them. And Grandpa and Grandma was just awful nice, good to take care of, and she was too. I just loved her. But her husband, he worked, and he'd taken care of her of mornings and evenings. Just he'd get her up of a morning and help her with her bath, and she'd fix her hair, and he'd bring her. I had all the cooking to do there. I didn't have no help. Grandma and Grandpa didn't help me.
And how old were you when you did all that cooking and everything, Grandma?
I must have been maybe 16 by this time. I don't know. I don't just remember exactly, but.
Did you go home on Sundays, or did you just?
Yeah, I could go once in a while. I didn't go regular, but right across the street on the corner, I got acquainted with another girl over there. She's about my age. Her name was Alty. So we spent some time together. But it was just a nice place to work and to take care of her, and I stayed there quite a while. And I heard him talking one day about someone in the family that had passed away, but I didn't know who it was. And so one Monday morning when I got up, well, she said that her sister's husband had died, and her sister was coming to live with them, so they wouldn't need a hired girl no more. So I lost that job, and I went home then and stayed a while again. I tried another place. It was a doctor, and they built a new house, and they had 2 little boys. I can't remember if he was a dentist or an MD, I don't know, I just know he was a doctor. But I didn't stay there because all the lower part of the house was just finished up. It was beautiful. And in the kitchen, you know, like where the eave comes down, you know, where your kitchen here, and you go up to the eave. This was all open up here, where the loft was up here. And that's where I had to sleep. I had to sleep up there in that loft. And it was just kind of like a ladder. They built it up here, and I had to go up that ladder. It was just too lonesome. I didn't stay up there. I didn't stay with that place. I didn't stay there, I don't take more than a week. That ended my keeping house for people in Oklahoma.
So that was Oklahoma?
That was in Oklahoma.
Do you know what city or town?
Oh, we lived between Tryon and Kearney. We was 4 miles from Kearney, and we was 3 miles from Tryon, out in the country.
Okay.
On the farm. And I don't know what I did between those times when I come back and stayed with Mary. I stayed with her when Alice was born. I guess I was 19 when I went back there and stayed with Mary when Alice was born.
Did Edith keep house for people or do house chores?
What?
Did Edith keep house for people or?
No, No, she got married.
I can't imagine her doing that. That's why I was asking. She was an outdoor gal.
Yeah, I know. And she was
an outdoor gal.
She didn't keep house for herself very well. I shouldn't say that. But
pitch hay in the barn, but I can't see her cleaning the linen in the house. You know.
No, she didn't. She went with Hillary Sharp. That was a minister's son. And he was an awful nice boy. But I don't know what happened when she went to Missouri. And she stayed with Mary when Alberta was born. And she met George. And I don't know how she happened to meet him. He just swept her off her feet. And Hillary even went back to Missouri to see her while she was back there. And I don't know, she broke off with him, sent him his ring to him.
She rebelled.
Yeah, I guess I
She's
should
a fun person.
say it for anybody to hear.
She had a hard time. She
biggest
always should laugh
mistake she
about
ever
things.
made. But I don't
That's
know.
Grandma's sister.
George
Edith.
just swept her off her
Older or
feet.
younger?
Older.
She was married.
How many years older was Edith than you, Grandma?
How many years?
Years older was Edith.
How many
Then
years
you.
between you and Edith?
Oh, well, there's
4 or 5?
not quite 5. It's less than 5. 4 something. See, her birthday is the 14th of February. Mine would be the 30th of
Valentine's Day.
September. Would like that much to be in 5 years. And in the same way with Walter, too. And there's almost 5 years between Walter and me. His was the 14th of July, and mine was in September.
Tell about your brothers or sisters that died.
Well, see, I don't know much about them, because, see, they died before I was born.
Oh, they did.
Papa was working on the railroad when they died, and we lived in Trenton.
Right.
Where in the railroad? Did he travel around? Or did your dad travel around, or was he?
I didn't hear it.
Did your dad travel, Grandma? Did he move around, or did he just work in Trenton?
You know what she said?
What was his job? Wasn't he a carpenter or something?
Oh, no, he worked in the roundhouse.
On machines?
Yeah, I don't know what they did in the roundhouse.
Well,
I guess all kinds of work
Yeah, they
in what's called a roundhouse. And,
overhauled the engines and
and
everything.
after they
That used to
died,
be a big train
I
place.
think it was about 8 days between their deaths. Little Nelson was 4 something, and little Minnie was 8.
Tell about how they died and how
They had
rapidly they died.
diphtheria. They died with diphtheria. And they said that during their sickness, my mother never left their bed. She'd lay down on the foot
4
of
and
the
an
bed, and
8-year-old.
she stayed with them till they died.
And it died about
after
a month,
they died,
month apart or something?
Papa got disheartened, and I guess expense and all. Probably they didn't make very much then either. Then's when he gave up, quit the railroad, and went to work for Tom Whitten out on the farm. And they've got paid so much a month. And they furnish you a house to live in, and horses to go to town. I guess it's kind of on your own. I don't know if they furnished anything else or not. They furnished you a place, and that's where they was living when Papa went to Oklahoma.
How far apart did the children die? Within a week or 2 of each?
I think it said 8 days.
Yeah.
I showed you those cards.
I remember seeing them a long time with the pictures of them, and they had something written on them. I remember
Yeah, I
that.
showed you those cards that day. You was up there that tell. I've got the memorial cards from each one of them. It tells the little verses on there. It tells what day they died and how old they were.
Talk about it.
And I think it was age just 8
Shock
days.
to a
I thought
family.
about what my mother went through with giving up a little 4-year-old boy and a little 8-year-old girl. How,
Week apart.
but she lived through it. They said the Lord don't give us more than we can bear. But I know when David died, I just didn't know how I'd get through it. But we got through it somehow.
Well, they didn't have any treatment for it then.
Yeah.
Sometimes they swabbed their throats with kerosene. They did everything imaginable. So,
There, that's better.
okay.
Okay. Well, Grandma, just change the subject a little bit. Tell us about your school. Where'd you go to school? What city did you live in? And
Well, we lived on the farm.
in Oklahoma.
Uh-huh. I think I told you about that when we went to that one school where the river, the creek got out and that man, Mr. Funnel, met us with his horse and helped us kids across. I think that's all on
Yeah,
It's on
there.
the
it's
tape,
on
I
there.
think.
Okay.
You
We
got
went
all
all past
that.
that.
Okay.
Then tell us how you met Grandpa. How old were you and
That's on
where?
I
And
think you've got that too.
boy, my
We're
tape's
past
missing. My tape's missing a lot of
Yeah, I
stuff.
think you got that.
Okay.
Tell us about when
thing,
the war was over and when you went to town.
One thing I just found out recently, though, that Edward, my cousin, that she's tracked down and lives in Trenton, my grandpa, I remember having a gas station with a little market or something down on the east side of town. Well, Edward remembers more about it. He's, what, 3 years older than me, or 3 or 4, and he remembers going there to Grandpa's store, so I'm anxious to talk to him more about that and see if he
Now,
remembers anything.
how is Edward related to you?
You
He's
made
my dad's brother's boy.
Okay, so he's your first
His
cousin.
uh-huh.
Paul Newkirk had a little store.
He had a gas station or a store on 19th or something.
Yeah.
That I remember something about. I just barely remember going down to
Well,
see him.
I think Everett, wasn't it? Edward's daddy had that filling station.
Well, it could have been. I don't
Yeah, and he got Paul Newkirk to work there.
know. Okay,
stay
so
there.
that's what Edward remembers about. So
Yeah.
he remembers more about it. But Edward's a little bit older than me, so
Yeah.
maybe he'd remember more.
Well, that's about all I know. I know, that, you know, that was trouble with Everett. You see,
This is my
him and
dad's
Green
brother.
him and Green, his wife, they had 7 children. That's Edward's mother and dad. They didn't get along too good. They separated. But Everett was, I don't know, was getting people to do something for him, and then he didn't pay them. See, like Everett had got that store up there on Main Street across from the library. He didn't have nothing much in the store, and he said, "I'll go back to work on the railroad," and he wanted Dad to come up and run the store. And he never paid Dad a dime. Dad would go up there and sit all day, and he maybe wouldn't have a customer or anything. One time he brought us some cheese home with us from the store. But Everett would be working on the road, and then Everett got that filling station down there. And he'd have Paul Newkirk to sit down there for him. And I don't know what was wrong with Everett. And see, he left Green, and they had the 7 children. And he didn't help her, I guess. And she kept a garnishee in his railroad check. And you know, you can only garnish it the 3rd time, then you lost your job. So she got his railroad job. She got Everett. He was running on the road. He was a fireman. Him and Winfield both was firemen.
That's the other brother.
And she got his job because she'd garnished his check. And after she garnished the 3rd one, then they suspended him. He didn't have a job no more. And then he just had these odd jobs, whatever he could get. And he took up with Miss Eads. They called her Miss Eads. She was, I don't know whether she'd been married or not, but anyway, he got to go into seeing her. I don't know whether they ever got married or not, but he took her down. He got a place down in South Missouri, down in there somewhere.
The Ozarks.
In the Ozarks or somewhere. And he took her down there and they lived it down there. But during the Depression, Everett had some kind of a farm down there that had a little 2-room house on it. And Winfield, he got laid off from the railroad during the Depression. And so Winfield and Florence, they went down there and lived a while. That's where they were living when Clyde died. Clyde died down there. I don't know whether he got pneumonia or what it was. Clyde died. That was their oldest boy. He was
These
16.
names come naturally, you know, Clyde and Buford and Clarence, they come very...
He was 16, and he died down there. And they stayed down there then, you know, for a long time. I don't know whatever happened to the farm. When things got better then, Winfield finally got back on the road. And he was back farmed. He was a fireman. Got back on the railroad.
But Everett at one time had a bunch of machines, like ping pong machines and nut machines and all kinds of things. Because I remember that in that garage down there, Grandpa's old garage, did a whole bunch of that stuff in it one time.
Well, we had him in the house, Russell.
Had them everywhere. I remember seeing them.
We had him in that south room there in
He
the
put
house.
these machines out in different bars and places like that, ping pong bars and machines and nut machines and candy machines and cigarette machines and stuff.
Got a wild one.
Everett.
He tried everything.
He's awful quiet. He never talked much. He didn't know much about his business to get a hold of. He was too quiet.
They're the family that had Ross and Glenn that shot the BB gun on the front porch and put the other boys out, their brother's boy eye out with the BB gun.
I didn't know that happened.
That I remember.
Ross was the oldest.
Yeah. But Ross is one of the guys I put out, wasn't it? Was it Glenn shot the gun?
Yeah, Glenn's the one doing that with the BB gun. It was Ross's eye. I don't know how old Ross was then.
Well, I know I don't remember seeing it or anything, but I remember everybody, it was impressed me with how many times they talked about it though. So I don't know if it was before my time or after my time or
Like
whatever.
Dad was out of work for a long time. After he quit the railroad, built our house, Everett wanted him to build his house. And he worked on it. I don't remember if he completed it or not, but I think he did. Newkirk helped him some on it. And, you know, he didn't pay Dad anything. That was one thing. Then I kind of complained on Dad working over there all the time, and Everett was running on the railroad, and he wasn't paying Dad anything, and we didn't have no income at all. And we was running a grocery bill. So one morning, I kind of objected to Dad going to work. I didn't want him to go. I said, Everett's not paying you anything, and he's working, running on the railroad. And Paul Newkirk come on, Russell, Dad hadn't come, so Paul Newkirk come on up to our house. So of course he bawled Dad out because he hadn't come to work. But Dad did finish the house. He went ahead and finished the house, but we never got any money. He built Everett's house, Dad did.
I understand.
Well, Grandpa Newkirk helped him some, but not too much. He even helped some on when he was building ours on the 3 rooms, and he'd always talk to David in that one room. He'd say, that's yours in Grandpa's room, that's yours in Grandpa's room. He helped some, but he played with David more than he worked. David was little then. And when David was, I don't know how old David was. Maybe he was only 4 years old. Something like that, and we was building on the other part of the house. And I'd been helping him some. I did put some laths on and helped him what I could reach up to do.
And laths and plasters, and that's what they had for the walls. They didn't have drywall.
There was a snow on the ground, and of course David was in and out with us because we was on this side and this side, but he had his coat on and he had a mitten on and had a glove on. I did, so you know, he'd be warm because there wasn't no fire over on that side. This side was warm. And you know, after a while we missed David, and we got to looking for him, you know, and he was gone. And Dad tracked him in the snow. He tracked his tracks clear up to Harris Avenue, and I was just frantic because I didn't know where he was at. And you know, between the street and the sidewalk here, there was kind of a, you remember, a gutter light, and I was afraid he'd fall down in there and he'd be in the snow. So anyway, Dad tracked him. He tracked him clear to town. David come up to Harris Avenue and down to 9th Street, and he went clear downtown, and he was there in front of the Methodist church.
How old was he?
She said
It
about
was
4.
tracking in, it was just snow. Dad tracked him in the snow, his little tracks was in the snow. And some man, he was crying. He's in front of the Presbyterian Methodist Church on 9th Street, wasn't it? And he was crying, so some man picked him up and carried him around the corner and took him in the barber shop and got him to the stove where he could, you know, get him warmed up. And they thought it was Winfield's boy. And found out it wasn't Winfield's boy, so then I guess that finally they learned then it was whose bill it was. But Dad finally found him. I went down to the folks and I stayed there. I didn't know what to do. And
What was he doing?
David had come up on the chair. We had a little dish or something that had some pennies in it. And David had a penny in his hand, just gripped like that. Clear to town, he was going to buy him a sled. He was going to buy him a sled. And he went clear downtown town. And when Dad found him, he was in that barber shop. And so Dad took him across the street to the hardware and bought him a sled and brought him home down to his mother's on the sled. He had a penny. He had a glove on one hand and a mitten on the other one and his little coat. And he had a cap on.
Now, how much did a sled cost back then?
I don't know what the sled cost. But Rod took him across the street and brought him on these little sleds. And he come back down to his mother's and I was there. And brought him home, put him home on the sled. I'll never forget that. Oh, I was frantic. I was so afraid he'd fall and then we'd find him in the snow.
Yeah, tell them about the St. Louis trip to St. Louis. Thing about David and the quarter and stuff.
Well, when Dad went to Des Moines to work, he left, David and I stayed home. And,
How old was David then, you know?
well, David was, he was 5. He wasn't 6 yet, he was 5. Because he went to Des Moines and he got a job, but it wasn't a good job then. And then he wanted David and I to come to Des Moines with him. And we did. We went to Des Moines. And he got a job on the Drake Stadium. Did you ever hear of the Drake Stadium in Des Moines? That big school, the Drake Stadium?
Well, I have watched him.
Dad worked on that. And we got an apartment. And I put David in kindergarten. This was in Des Moines, Iowa. I put him in kindergarten. And then they finished and got it so far, then the Dad got laid off. He didn't have any more of his kind of work right then, or didn't need him or something. And then's when we bought the old Ford car, 1926 Ford car. Dad
Brand new though.
He didn't have a car to get around to look for another job, and he couldn't get another job, so we went back to Trenton and stayed there. But before Christmas, he went on to St. Louis, Missouri, and he joined a union down there and thought he could get a good job down there. And then it was after Poppy died. Poppy died in January. It was towards spring then. He came after David and I and took us back to St. Louis with him. And we went back and we got an apartment. And I put David in kindergarten down there. This was all the same year. It was in the fall, he was at Des Moines, and this was in early spring. When I was back in Trenton, I put him in kindergarten in Trenton after we come from Des Moines down home. I put him in school there. And then we went to St. Louis, and he finished up kindergarten in St. Louis. 3 schools he went to, and he was 6 years old then in March. So you see, he was 5 when we went to Des Moines. And Dad would just make enough money to pay the rent and get us something to eat. And then he got out of work down there, so we had to go back to Trenton. He borrowed $10 from his cousin. Aunt Emma Barnes' son lived in St. Louis. We went over there that night and he borrowed $10 from him to pay the rent on the car so we'd get the car out. And the landlady told us she'd give us that week's rent. She was so nice. Her name was Redmond, Mrs. Redmond. Her and her husband were separated, but he was living in the basement and she was living up here. But anyway, she was awful nice to us. she knew Dad was out of work and didn't know when to get a job, and so she said it would help us and it would help her. She would let us move if we wanted to move. And she could rent the place to somebody else and she could get the pay, where if she kept us and Dad was out of work maybe 2 more weeks, you know, she wouldn't get no pay. So she said it would help her and help us. So and I was afraid she wanted to keep my silverware, you know, for the rent, but she didn't. She was very nice to it. She said if we ever got able, she said we could pay her. So we left that morning. We went across the Mississippi River over to Uncle Newkirk's brother. What was his name?
Uncle Al?
Not Uncle Al. Uncle Willie. What was Uncle Willie's name? Uncle Willie and Aunt Lyda. We went over there and we stayed a night or two with them, and they borrowed $10 from Uncle Willie to buy gas to get home. So we got home and we didn't have no money and we was in debt $20.
Well, tell them about David's experience with the quarter or something new sent us. You sent him to buy something.
Oh yeah, it was 50 cents. The last 50 cents we had. I should have went with him, but I was about sick. I just took about as much of it as I could. I was sick. The lady up on the 3rd floor, she sent me down a cup of coffee. But anyway, we gave it to David to go get a loaf of bread. And at that time, you know, they had sacks of beans and rice and all kinds of stuff, you know, along. They think that's where David did. But anyway, we give David, it was just right around the corner, give David 50 cents to go get us a loaf of bread. And he lost a loaf of bread, or he lost the 50 cents. So he came back to the door. I didn't know about this because I was inside, but he'd come back to the door and he was standing out there crying. And that lady up on the 3rd floor, she gave him 50 cents.
Wow.
And so she was a nice lady, but I don't know if she's the one, but I think she's the same one. She sent me down a cup of coffee. But we was through some hard times during the Depression. I'll tell you, children nowadays, they can't even realize what we had to go through with in some of those days back in a little place like that. You just don't have no money, and you didn't, no jobs, and couldn't get any. It was just hard. But we lived through it.
Where are we at? Bring you up to date.
You know, where do we go from here?
Well, now, David, you talked about David working before the war. When did he join up?
Well,
the service?
After he went to Kansas City, when he came home from the CC camps, then he worked on the WPA. He drove the truck, and then he had charge of the children. And that ended. Didn't it end? That's why he died. So anyway, he was still on that relief fund, and they would send him to school. And so he went to Kansas City. Mr. Marino lived next door. He hauled
big
fresh
trucks, he hauled
vegetables
fruit.
back and forth from Trenton to Kansas City. So Sunday night he took David with him on the truck to Kansas City. And then he went to school down there. He got I don't remember if they furnished it. Anyway, he got a room.
I remember.
And
With that woman, I remember that woman, whatever her name was, a real nice lady, she rented him a room. That's where he was at when I went to see him.
Well, when he was going to school, I don't know who he roomed with then while he was going to school. And, you know, he'd come home once in a while on weekends, and he'd bring his big white cover overcoat. He'd bring them home, you know, and I'd wash them for him, and he'd take them back. He didn't do that too many times, a few times. You'd put your bicycle up in the basement and wait until David would come up on the weekend to fix your bicycle for you.
Yep.
And so then he got through school, and he got this job out at Raytown. That's kind of a part of Kansas City, east of Kansas City. And he got a job on an airplane there. And
A place called Ong Aircraft.
Ong Aircraft.
How do you spell it?
And that was where he was at when he met Della.
I don't know.
Out there.
O-N-G, O-U-N-G, something like that.
And Della was from Kansas City then?
Della Weiser was her name.
She's about 5'2", something like that.
Yeah, she was little, very little person.
Quite a contrast between the two of them.
Probably weighed 100 pounds, I doubt. Very little person.
Does she work there too?
She was the only child.
She
Her father
must have
was-
worked in some office somewhere, I don't remember, but I went down one time after he was working there and spent a week with David and her.
That's
and,
the week. That's the week that Dad and I spent our 25th wedding anniversary. And you was down there with David, and we had some back taxes on our house, and the taxes for that year, and I got enough money together to pay them, and I went and paid our back taxes, and I paid the taxes, and I was out of money, so I didn't have money to go down, to go out to see Dad on our 25th wedding anniversary. He was in the hospital, and he was down there with David. And, they hadn't bought the house then. They didn't buy the house till after they got married, did they?
Right, now he was living with that woman where we stayed,
Yeah.
And she had her mother, she lived with her mother somehow, her mother
I
or
can't
something.
remember what her name was, but before he went out there, while he was still, he was still going to school, and then when I went down, he had me to come down one Saturday night, and I stayed where he was rooming, and it was a nice little bedroom, a nice single bed, and then we was going to go out to the hospital the next day and see Dad, and I stayed all night there that night, and David brought me up a Coke. He was across the street with some of the guys over there, and he stayed with me a while, so he went back over there. And the next day, we went out to see Dad. We went out to the hospital. We went out there to see him. And that landlady, she spoke so well of David because she said he was so good to turn the lights out. He never left the lights on at night. When he'd come in, he'd always turn the lights out. And I said, well, he was always taught to turn the lights out, not let them burn if he wasn't using them.
Eddie still does the same thing when he comes
So
home.
that was one place. And then when he got the job out to Hall, that's when he lived with that woman, and she had quite a big yard around the house.
Yeah, that's what
I've got one picture of David, and she had a big dog, and I've got David's picture with the dog. She was awful good to David too. David was a good boy.
So what year was that?
That
Probably 41 or 42. Right?
something like that.
He joined the
He graduated
Naval
in
Reserve.
'38, of course he was
When
in
he down in
62
school,
there, so
because he
that
was-
would have been 40 when he come home. So there's been about, this would have been about 42.
They trained pilots at Ong Aircraft on the first plane. They had ground school there, and they also flew for their solo when they're just flying, just Piper Cubs. Before they went to Florida, they were more advanced and stuff. So David was there. His job was so-called essential because he was working there on the planes and stuff. So he was deferred for a while, and I don't know why, whether he signed up or whether they called him or what, and he went as active, called him active duty.
He came home, you know, and signed up. You remember?
Well, I don't remember that.
Yeah, David come home, he signed up in the reserves. And he
Now,
was-
you said Naval Reserve?
There's Naval Reserve.
Why not, if he was in with the flying,
Navy
why not
Air
the...
Corps. Wasn't that what he was in, the Navy Air Corps?
Well, it
Okay.
was Naval Reserve to start with. I don't know what he ended up in.
But he came home and signed up the reserves, and then when Roosevelt said the reserves would have to go, that's when they took him in. He had to go in. He was called in. But
He didn't go until 42, 43, probably 43, did he?
So we came out here in '43. And
He wasn't called in, was he? I don't know if he'd been called yet or
I
not.
don't think he was called in. Well, he was called.
Stover.
Okay.
There, too.
Now, what were you going to tell us about?
When you came across, you came to California?
Well, she don't you tell them about Aunt Mary telling you to come out here and we finally left and all that kind of stuff. Closing up your house.
What did you bring with you?
How much money did you have in
Tired.
your pocket?
When
Yeah.
Dad was in the hospital, and he'd been in the hospital a long time, and David was in Kansas City. Mary, she kept writing for Russell Wilson, or for Russell and I to come to California. We talked about it, and finally we decided to come. We boarded up the house, boarded up the windows, and covered up everything inside the best we could. We left the key with Miss Scott, our next door, second lady lived the second door from us. And
That was,
Russell had a little girlfriend, I'm going to tell that.
Oh, good.
Little Randy Ann.
What was her name?
Randy Ann.
wasn't it?
Mary Ann.
Yeah.
Mary Ann. I've even got her picture. You don't know that, but
Dad?
the one. But she sent you a nice picture of her graduation, and you threw that away. Because you was dating Lois then. I guess you didn't want Lois to see that picture. But anyway, on the way out, the train would it'd stop at places. 2 or 3 times, Russell, he got off and he bought a little trinket, some kind of little thing. He sent it to Mary Ann before he got out here.
What year was that, Grandma?
First year he got out here, he'd sit down there and wrote Mary Ann a little note.
What year was that, Grandma?
So that we got out here okay.
1943.
Okay. She was a cute little girl. And
I made some money on the train out here. I'll interject with that deal. I used to, in the Boy Scouts, we used to get this, do braiding, you know, they make these stake around your neck and for hang keys onto and make different braiding
Still
squares
make 'em.
around, stuff like that.
all about that.
And I made it quite a few of them, and the
Lanyard?
porters on the train were crazy about them. So I got it traded for all kinds, for money and for cokes or stuff. And then I found out that we had the only air-conditioned car, and this is about a 3-day trip, you know, out here. And so I'd go down in the cars where the people were sweltering, you know, and I'd go up to a family or something like that, and I said, well, if you want me to, when an empty seat comes along another car, I'll come back and get you. Well, I'd get tipped for that, so I made money on the way out here.
Yeah. I
Good for you.
remember
What an entrepreneur, Dad.
that. We had the only air-conditioned car on the train, didn't we?
By the time we got in there, we had all our friends with us. Yeah.
Did you push any outhouses over on your way out, Dad?
And Alice and Mary met us at the station. And Alice's car.
I had a wool suit on, as I remember, something like that.
Russell brought his,
And all got here in September, you know, blazing 90-degree temperature, and had a wool suit on.
Russell brought his bicycle, and Lois put it on, or Alice put it on the side of the car. And we got out to Mary's. She had the room all fixed up for us, ready for us. We lived there till Russell and Lois got married.
So 3 or 4 years you lived there?
No,
We lived there
Got
6
married in
years,
49.
6 years.
with her, and then in the meantime, I had looked to try to get some places, but you know, after the war, you just couldn't find anything. And,
What did you do for work, Grandma?
well, when I first come to Mary's, I wanted to work. This was funny. I read in the paper where they wanted you to link sausage.
What?
Link sausage.
Lincoln, huh?
But that didn't sound too bad, Lincoln sausage. So I went to work one morning. Betty let me wear her galoshes, so if I got my feet wet. And I didn't know it was a packing house. I thought I was going down there and make sausage. That's all there was to it. And down there it was a packing house, and it was, I can't remember the name of it now.
Hormel's.
Yeah, it was Hormel's. And they had this, in the middle of the room, they had this great big kettle, and it had paddles in it, and it turned, just revolved all the time, and it had the meat in it, and whatever they were putting in it was piled over here on the cement, and they'd make a shovel, and they'd shovel a shovel full of that in it, and it just keeps, that's the kind of hot dogs we had.
I did eat hot dogs for a long time.
Oh, I couldn't eat a hot dog for a long time. and they put that shovel in, it'd just keep it turning and that would stir it. Well, the first thing I had to do, me and another lady, we had to clean up all those little greasy things. That was the job I had to do at first. I got sick. I couldn't eat my lunch. I was sick all day when I tried to work. And when we got through cleaning up all the greasy things, and dish pans was about this big square, great big old tubs we had to wash them in. And then we had to lick sausage, and they'd have these big long, whatever they were.
Catgut.
Chicken guts or something. And the machine was up here.
The intestines.
The table was marked, and they'd blow that in there, and we'd lay our hot dog here to this room, and then we'd have to give it a couple of twists, and it'd go on, and then it'd come on down further, and we'd have to give it a couple of twists. I had to do that then till quitting time. I come out and I told the guy I couldn't come back. I was just sick. I worked one day. I was sick, and at that time, you know, you were signed up that you had to work on, what kind of work was it, Russell, now? David, Russell, what kind of work was it? But he said he wouldn't hold that again, man. And what kind of work did you have to work at during the war? I don't know, but anyway, I worked one day and that was enough for me. I never went back there. So
Might have been an essential industry or something.
Alberta was working at Douglas out at Santa Monica, and she was living with Mary, and she was riding the bus every day to Santa Monica to work. So Mary took me, and we went out there one day, and I tried to get a job out to Douglas where she worked because we could go together.
Were you living in Montebello?
Oh no, this was Santa Monica.
Mary's.
From
No, we were in-
Montebello
we were
to
in
Santa
Montebello.
Monica out there. It was a
Spruce
long
Street.
ways to go, but we could go together. Alberta was going out there, and she was going back and forth, coming home at nights. And so we went out there, and I went through the examination. The doctors, and every doctor would test you for everything. And when I got down to the heart doctor, well, he wouldn't pass me at all. He said I had an injured heart, and I couldn't pass through.
You have an injured heart?
And you're 98?
And I had an injured heart. He said it was
a
heart
great
from an
diagnosis.
infection
Yeah.
sometime.
He's dead a long time ago, no doubt.
I never knew any time I ever had an infection or anything. So I come out, I was just about crying, and I told Mary I didn't know there was anything wrong with my heart. That hurt me worse, I think, than not getting the job, that I had an injured heart.
And he probably
So
skipped
I
a beat
still
like a lot
wanted
of
to
people
work,
that have had children skips a
And I
beat.
knew about Lockheed's down in Los Angeles, just across the bridge. And I went down there, and just a day or two, I went down there and I went through the examination, and they never said one word against my heart. I just went through it like that, and I got a job. So then Alberta quit out there. She come to Lockheed, and she got a job at the building on this side of the bridge. So she'd get off on this side, and I'd cross the bridge, and I'd get off over here, and my work was here. And coming home then, I'd get on down here, and I'd cross the bridge, and Alberta get on. So we were together, back and forth every day. And they never said a word about my heart.
What did you do there, Grandma?
So I started in on sorting small parts, just small parts beginning. Then I got to working on the P-38, the wings of the P-38. And then I got transferred to Burbank. I don't remember if they closed that down, and that was in the building that Bullocks had always used for their warehouse. And maybe they vacated it then, I don't know. But anyway, I got transferred to Burbank.
What year was that?
And I got a ride with a young man that lived in Montebello. He took several passengers. There was 2 or 3 women, and he lived in South Montebello. But when I went out to Burbank to work, you had groups. And my group leader, sometimes I'd have to work on Saturday, and my driver didn't go. Sometimes he'd go, and I didn't have to go, but I went to work out there. And I worked on the Constellation. The last job I had, I was bucking rivets for a man that lived in Pasadena. He was putting on the wing Phillips, things that went right next to the wing. And we had to put socks over our shoes to walk up on the wing so we wouldn't scratch it. And I bucked the rivet. I never did shoot the rivets. I was scared to death of that gun. I was scared of it. And bucking them was about the hardest job.
Bucking them's when you're standing on the other side.
Yeah, you stand there and they shoot it on the other side, and you got a bucket on this side.
So they're shooting you, and that was safer than you shooting them?
Yeah.
What you said.
I was scared to death that I'd accidentally touch that thing and that thing would shoot on. I was afraid I'd hurt somebody. I was scared of it. If that plunger was in there, if you just happened to touch this, that plunger would shoot out. I was scared of it. So I'd rather buck the rivets than to shoot them. So that was my last job at Lockheed.
When it was slow, though, she told me it's slow, they'd take the rivets out and put them back in again.
Yeah, when I was working.
What?
When I was working down there in Los Angeles, at the first place, you know what, when the inspector would be coming in, there was too many working sometimes. We didn't hardly have elbow room to work along the side of the plate. But when they'd know ahead of the inspectors are coming through today, he's coming through. So the foreman would want to get us all to work, and they'd have us drilling out good rivets, and then drill a bunch of them out, and another crew would come along and put them in, just to keep us working.
Well, don't you remember if you only read the
That's
book?
the kind of work that went on in a lot of those defense plants.
If you read the book Truman, Harry Truman talks about this, and he discovered this, and he's the one that corrected a lot of that. But that what they were doing then, they were giving contracts out cost plus. So the cost could be
Whatever.
Sky's the limit. And they made 10%. If they made it more expensive, they get 10% was higher. And so he's the one that got in. He got in trouble with all the congressmen and all the payoffs. So he had, the first part of it was great the way he exposed a lot of that. He traveled around and exposed an awful lot of that carry and got it back where they had to bid on the job, and that's what they got paid, and they had to come with specifications. So they corrected, but a lot of defense was going on that way.
That's
It
terrible.
was sent out on bids, cost plus 10%.
Even that's during the war.
Yeah, during the war.
Wow.
But so you got a lot of these places to convert from different types of production to aircraft or tank or Jeep and something that was building other things before.
Because they was perfectly good, there was nothing wrong with them, but they just had a crew. So everybody'd be busy when the inspectors come through. And then after inspectors was gone, half of them would go to the restroom and go to sleep. See, I worked the swing and then I worked graveyard.
A double shift then.
I worked graveyard first, didn't I? I worked graveyard. I went to work at noon and got off at 7 in the morning. I went to Burbank. I worked swing. I worked about every afternoon.
Yeah.
Now when I went to work,
How much?
65 cents an hour.
And that was Lockheed?
Lockheed. And when I went to work for Catalina Swimwear, they guaranteed me 65. If I didn't make it, I'd get 65. But if I had a good day, it was piecework, and I'd have a good day, and I'd make good money. The next day I didn't make 65 cents. They'd take it off of this day and put it on this day.
Kind of average it out
Yeah,
there.
they didn't average it. I didn't get paid each day. It was averaged out. But they guaranteed me 65 cents an hour for the whole week. If I didn't make it, they guaranteed it.
Now, when did you go to work for Catalina? And how did you change from Lockheed to Catalina?
Well, after I got laid off from Lockheed, we drew I drew my unemployment for a while. And then Brother Barber there in Montebello, Alberta was laid off too.
Was this after the war?
Alberta got laid off the next day after the war was over, but I worked quite a while after. I must have worked 2 or 3 months, I think, after the war was over. But Alberta went to work the next morning, and everybody down to Douglas was lined up. They was laid off. Not everybody, but she said about everybody. But then I drew my unemployment. And then Mary went back to Missouri on a visit, and we stayed there. And Brother Barber had told Alberta about Susan's there in Montebello, the blouse shop, wanted help. So Alberta got a job over there. So I went over there to the shop one afternoon to see Alberta. See, Mary was going back to Missouri, he was going to school, and I was there by myself. And so I went over there and I found out I could get a job. I'd never run a power shore machine or anything before, but I thought, well, this is my chance to learn. So I got a job at the blouse shop, and we worked there then. And then they laid us off because they was going to have a load of housecoats come in, and they'd be in a few days. So Albert and I was drawing our unemployment. We went to Whittier and picked up our unemployment. So we come back past Susan's to pick up our pillows. We had left them there because we thought we'd get to go back to work. And then they told us that they weren't going to get this order. It was going back east to be made because it could be made so much cheaper than make it here. So we was out of a job then. And then Bessie Clemens that lived in Hawthorne, she was the floor lady at this blouse shop. So we was drawing our unemployment for a while, and then she wrote us, we got a letter from her. She had a blouse shop down on Hill Street in Los Angeles, and she wanted Albert and I to come down there and work for her. So we did. We went down there, and we worked for a while, and they was making robes for winter out of that stuff that looks like velvet and all, for all winter. And then when we finished all them up, we had to do blouses. So doing a blouse, you had to complete it. You could do this part on this machine. If you wanted to narrow part of it, you'd go to another machine. If you want to make a buttonhole, it's another machine. And Alberta couldn't stay with it, and she gave that out. But in the meantime, we went home on the bus, and we met a lady that worked there in Montebello, Susan's on the blouses, and she got a job at Catalina. And she knew that Catalina was going to open up this new shop down here on 1212 something in Los Angeles. So she wanted Alberta and I to put her application in there, and we did. We put her application, we went by one morning and stopped at Catalina and put her application in. That was at the main office. And we went on to work, and I think that's the same day that Alberta quit. She just couldn't take it. It got on her nerves. So about middle of the afternoon, she walked out. But I stayed with it till we got a letter from, just 2 or 3 days, we got a letter from Catalina and told us to come to work. So that's how we went to Catalina then. And then, I don't know just how long we were there.
Hold on a second, okay?
And
Okay.
I don't know what you want to know.
I want to know, as far back as you know, who was your, like, do you know who your grandpa or great-grandpa was or anything? And where'd he come from? Or where'd your grandma come from?
No, I don't. See, I don't know anything about him.
Okay. Do you have any memory of your grandpa or grandma?
My father's father, Grandpa Criswell, well, they lived in, so that I heard them talk, and I don't know, but they lived in Chillicothe, Missouri. And Grandma Criswell died. And I don't know if she died in childbirth or not, but she had my father, and he must have been maybe 3 or 4 years, 5 years old. I don't know how old. And so they give Uncle Willie to somebody to raise, and Papa went with his Aunt Sue Austin. Now I don't know who Aunt Sue Austin was, but I think she must have been his sister to my father's mother.
Okay.
So they sent my father to live with Aunt Sue Austin, and he lived with them, and that was in Trenton. The Austins had a big white house, kind of off, had a lot of land. Probably Russell knows it, where you turn off to go up to Tyndall, that big, great big house that set off where that was Austin's home. And Papa lived with him till he was about 12 years old, and he said they weren't very good to him. So he left home. He left, and he just went out and just worked with the farmer for a board and room and just what they wanted to give him. And I don't know where they were married. I don't know where my parents was married. I don't know where my mother met him. I don't know anything about that.
You don't know where they were married or where they met, or?
No, I don't. Probably I did when I was a child. Maybe heard him talk about it, but I don't know where they met. I know they got married. My mother and him got married. He never got very much schooling. Papa didn't. And Mary was oldest child. Mary was a baby. So Papa and Mommy, they went to South Dakota. They left Trenton and they went to South Dakota. But they didn't stay there. I don't know why he went, and I don't know what he went for unless he was looking for work. But they didn't stay to South Dakota too long. And my mother's sister, Aunt Becky, that was her oldest sister. Aunt Becky went with them to South Dakota.
You know their last name?
Well,
What was your mother's last name, maiden name?
her name was Baum.
How you spell it?
Baum, B-Y,
R-U-M.
B-Y-R-M, isn't that?
R-U-M.
R-U-M.
B-Y-R-M, yeah.
Okay.
I know Grandma Barry was married twice because my mother had, well, I know she had this one half-sister in there in Missouri because I kind of remember her. I've got her picture. But I think that she had a half-brother and another half-sister, but I wouldn't swear to it.
This is your grandmother, then was married twice.
Yeah, Grandma.
Now, how did Aunt Becky fit into this?
Huh?
Aunt Becky was she your mother's sister?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
half-sister?
Yeah, she's Mommy's full sister.
Full sister.
Aunt Mary, Missouri. Leola Harris's grandma
Okay,
was Mommy's half-sister.
all right. Now, the half dime that we have, Aunt Becky gave that half dime to us, right?
Well, Aunt Becky had charge of it. Grandma Barham got it somewhere. I don't know who got it or how they got it, but Grandma had it, and of course Aunt Becky was living. She'd never been married. She was still living with Grandma, only when she'd work out in peace house for people. And so when Grandma Barham died, Aunt Becky got
Her thing.
custody or whatever you call it of all the things. So Aunt Becky kept it until I guess she was about to die, and shortly Jesse Cash. Now that was my mother's half-sister's son, Jesse Cash. And I don't know what his mother's name was. But anyway, when she died, or before he died, well, he had charge of Aunt Becky. Said all she had was maybe a suitcase of stuff because she'd been keeping house. And she married, after Grandma died, I'm getting kind of mixed up, after Grandma died, she married Uncle Hank Welch. And they had one baby, but she died.
That's Aunt Becky did.
Aunt Becky. But she married a man that had 4 grown children, 2 grown boys and 2 grown daughters. And she lived with him, took care of him till he died. And he died, we had cancer in the mouth or jaw. And we was living in Oklahoma when he died. And then she kept house, just would live with people, you know, like I did with Halls, where she got her board and room and her little salary. All several years, and then she married Uncle Andy Carson. And you know,
That'd be her third marriage.
you know, the Carson that lived across the street from us in one of those little houses, you know, that was Uncle Andy's son that lived there.
On 14th Street in Missouri, you mean, in Trenton?
Here.
Across the street. Where? Up by Eves, or?
It was in between the, there was the Millers. Maybe they lived next door to Millers.
There's 2 Millers,
Maybe
yeah.
they lived where Millers lived. I know they lived across the street from me, Uncle Andy's son.
I don't remember them.
And I think they had one boy. But anyway.
You know, it'll help if you'd sit there to kind of get you both here and her sitting back.
Pardon?
After Uncle Andy died, then Aunt Becky, she just kept house for people and lived with people. And that's what she was doing when she died.
But she was quite old, as I remember.
She was 89. She just like
Okay.
a few years she'd be
So there's
90.
old age on your side then.
And she's the oldest one that I know of on my side of the house that lived, was Aunt Becky.
Okay.
Just like a few days of being 90. And so
That was
Jesse
old way back
Cash
there too.
Oh, yeah.
had charge of everything when she died.
Who did?
So Jesse Cash.
Oh, okay.
So that's how he had the dime and the half dime and I don't know some other things, but I don't know the story. I don't know the history about where they come from and who it was, whether Grandma Barham got them from during the wars. I don't know.
So speaking of half dime, reminds me another, remember that whiskey glass I had, the big crystal one? Now, how did Grandpa get that?
Or the one that I gave you?
Right.
Have you still got it?
We used to put toothpicks in it.
Yeah, have you still got it?
Yes.
Yeah, Papa was coming home. You know, they had open saloons those days. And I guess they had a fight or a brawl or something in there, and Papa was coming down, and it was thrown through the window. Someone threw it at somebody. And
Oh, I got that.
It was just dirt streets,
Real
you know.
thick, heavy.
Wasn't paved
Was
streets. And so Papa picked it up, and that's how he got it.
So that's gotta be, how old has it gotta be?
Older than me.
Older than you, so it's over 100 years old then, okay.
Yeah, he's probably real old.
Okay.
And we used it for toothpicks at home, and
Right.
Mommy, they gave it to me, and I used it for toothpicks.
Right. Okay. Now I keep wanting to go back to, who's the woman that was bald-headed and smoked a corncob
Oh,
pipe?
that was Grandma Barham. That was my mother's
That,
mother.
yes, I remember
That was
that.
Grandma Barham,
It's Grandma Barham, that's what we're talking about, that's your grandma. And your grandma was married
twice.
twice.
But I don't remember who her first husband, but he was the father of Aunt Mary, Missouri. See, he would have been Leroy Harris's grandfather.
Grandfather, right.
Leroy Harris, you see. See, Barbara Harris was half cousin, because Aunt Mary, Missouri, she was a half sister to Mother.
Okay.
So that made Barbara and Leroy Harris, you know, a half cousin. Would have been, wouldn't it? I don't know just how that goes, but she was, Aunt Mary, Missouri was her grandmother. Barbara Harris was her mother. Barbara Harris, she would have been my mother's niece, half-niece,
Half-niece,
half-sister's daughter.
There you go, okay, this half stuff gets mixed up, doesn't it? Okay.
How about on Grandpa's side?
Do you know anything about my father's grandparents? No, I know my grandpa was Dad's father.
Yeah, Uncle
Little bit of-
Al. Your Uncle Al.
Uncle Al was his brother,
His brother. And he
so my
had-
father's brother was Uncle Al.
And he had another brother that lived up in Des Moines. But I don't remember ever seeing them or ever visiting with them.
You know his name? From Des Moines?
Des Moines,
You know
know-
his name, that brother's name.
I don't even remember his name.
Okay.
Don't remember ever seeing them. I don't remember them visiting him.
And what was Grandpa's mother's first name? My dad's mother,
Oh, her name was Elizabeth.
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 What was her?
Elizabeth Berry.
Elizabeth Berry. Okay.
And her mother, Grandma Berry, lived with them quite a while there. She died there, Grandma Berry.
Uh-huh.
I remember her because she died after.
Do you know
Dad.
where they were from, or anybody where they were from? All from that area, or don't know?
I know Dad was born in Schuyler County.
Schuyler County.
Schuyler County, if you know where that is.
Was that east, or you know where it's from? Grundy
I don't know
County.
where Schuyler County is.
Okay.
Maybe they've even changed the name of it.
I doubt it.
But that's in, I think it's in some of that history that I've got. I think it tells when Dad joined the church and when he ever joined it. And
What kind of church, Grandma?
Baptist. I guess it was Baptist. I don't know. I know my Dad's parents was Baptist.
Dad, his parents were
Grandpa
Baptist.
Newkirk was, they were Baptist.
My dad was Baptist too.
So you've been a Baptist all your life?
Don't ask me why.
From how old?
I guess that's where we attended church, and that's where my parents belonged, and there was a big tent meeting going on, and I accepted the Lord one night there.
Can you remember anything about the service at all?
Oh, we had great service every night. We had meetings every night.
Who spoke?
I can't remember the minister's name.
Were you baptized there?
No, the man is minister of the church, and that was Mr. Sharp. He was the father of this boy that my sister Edith was engaged to, Sharp.
In Oklahoma.
And
So you accepted the Lord in Oklahoma then?
oh yes.
How old were you?
Well, I was between 12 and 13. See, I would have been 12 in September, and it was summertime when I was baptized, so it had to be the next summer. So I was between 12 and 13, probably closer to 13 and 12. But sometime during there, I was baptized because it was in the summertime, and the minister's daughter, Lois, and I were the only two that was baptized.
In a river or where?
At that.
You baptized in a river or where?
No, it was sort of a lake or something beside of the road. And I was baptized on Sunday afternoon. And we was down to Sharps. And Mary was living with us at that time when I was baptized. And Mary made me some moccasins, awful pretty moccasins as white, out of some kind of cloth, and put the pink bows on them for me to wear out in the pool. And I remember I hated to get them all dirty. I wore them out in the pool and got them all wet and got them all dirty. But I was between maybe about 12 and a half, between 12 and 13.
Was Edith a Christian?
Yeah, she belonged to Baptist Church.
Did she? Mary joined the Christian church, so.
Yeah, because that's the church Charles belonged to. And she went into church with him.
Oh, okay.
Uncle Charles?
Yeah.
But see, Mary
That's
was,
Aunt Mary's husband.
Mary was 13 years older than I was. She was the oldest one. And see, her and Charles, she went to school in Trenton, Mary did. Mary got her education in Trenton.
8th grade or 12th grade?
I don't know whether she went more than 8, I don't know. But then Edith did too, you see. If she's about 10, she got about 4 years of school in Trenton, Edith did, before they moved to Oklahoma. Then when we moved to Oklahoma, and we lived here in the Ferguson house, Poppy leased that for 5 years, so we was going to go to school down here, to this school. And Edith and me was going. Walter, you see, was just 1 year old when we went to Oklahoma. Well, Edith was always getting in a fight coming home as some boy going to school, and they'd get in a fight. So Poppy took us out of that school and put us up here in Parkland. Then we had to go 3 miles. Parkland had 2-room school. I was in this room and Edith was over here. But she finished there. She was 5 years there. So her 5 years put her out of 8th grade. So then when Poppy bought this place and we moved over here, Walter and I went to Valley Queen. That was our school, Valley Queen. The school was on this corner and the church was over here on this corner. And so Edith didn't go to school there. Walter started the school there and I finished up there. That was Valley Queen School. But we had to walk 2.5 miles to that school.
Do you remember what your education was like? Like, what did they teach you in 8th grade or anything?
Remember what, Eddie?
I mean, was it one teacher in the whole school, 2 teachers, or?
One-room school.
Is it one-room school?
In Parkland, it was 2 rooms. Edith was in this room and I was in this room. But I don't remember my teacher's name or anybody there.
You remember any of your teachers?
There. But then when we moved over here, I went to school at Valley Queen. Privet was one of my teacher's names.
Privet?
Privet. But I can't remember, I don't think I remember any other one.
Was he a good teacher?
He was just all one room. There's just one room school, and the stove sat right in the middle of the school. And we'd go to school those cold mornings, it'd be icy cold. Everybody was hovering around the stove to get warm.
Did you have to walk in the snow to school?
Well, quite a bit. Sometimes the road would be kind of cleared off. It wasn't paved, you know, just dirt road, just a single road. And the snow and ice was on the sides. And,
So you walk about 2.5 miles to school?
yeah, 2.5 there. We had to go 3 miles when we went to Parkland.
Each way or round trip?
No, each way. 2.5 there in the morning and 2.5 home.
So it'll take you about an hour to walk and about an hour to walk back, huh?
I don't know. I think kids we run part way.
Especially coming home, probably.
Yeah, probably coming home.
Now, what were your responsibilities? When you're living in Oklahoma, you're going to school. Did you have to do chores in the morning before you got to school or after you got home?
Yeah, we had chores in the evening, chores in the morning.
What did you have to do in the morning?
That's blinking off and on. Does that mean anything?
Now, I can't remember what we had to do, but I know one thing, we had to fill the wood box every night for wood.
Okay.
We had to gather the eggs.
Okay.
I don't remember what we had to do.
Did you ever find any snakes in the egg bin or anything?
No, but we found them along the bank, along the side of down below the edge of the pasture. In the spring, we'd see those big old snakes crawl out.
Big old snakes?
Luckily, we never got snake bit. Any of us kids never got snake bit. We was coming home from church or somewhere one Sunday in our road, come down, our house sat down off of the road, we was coming down the road here, and then we had to turn around and go around the draw and come back this way to the barn. The barn was here. And when we was coming right up here, there was a tree, about half grown, right by the side of the road. There was a snake up in that tree. I remember that so plain. We went right on around. Papa went home, he got his shotgun, and he went back and he shot that snake up in the tree. I remember that so well.
What kind of snake was it?
I don't remember what kind it was, but it was a snake.
Big
There
one.
was quite a few. They called them water moccasins.
Yeah.
Would come out
Rattlesnakes.
from under the dead
And they,
logs.
and they told me that they wouldn't bite you in the water.
They told me they what?
They wouldn't bite you in the water. We used
We
to go
never got in
swimming.
the water with the snake.
We used to, when I was a grandmother swimming, we used to see those snakes along the top of the water, and they told me as long as you're in the water, they wouldn't bite you. So I didn't find out till later that they would bite you. Yeah.
We never got in the water. But
You ever
we
see
had
them swimming on top of the water, the snakes?
Yeah, I have. In movies.
Ready to take off. Yeah, I think we go.
House,
Okay, where were you married?
in Yuri's mother's house.
In Trenton?
Yes. See, he was in the service, and he was stationed at Lawton, Oklahoma. And he kept writing. He wanted to get married, and I didn't know whether I wanted to get married or not. And his mother wanted him to come home, and he'd come home on a furlough if I get married. So I decided when we get married, he came home on a 5-day furlough, and he came home that evening, and he stayed with his mother, and I stayed with his brother and his wife up here, 2 or 3 doors up here, and we were married in his mother's house in the front room, married at 12 o'clock.
12 noon?
Front room. And the Baptist minister married us, and she fixed a dinner, and Mary and Charles come up for the wedding, and Liddy was in high school, and since we were married at 12 and she had the lunch hour, she got to come down and see us married at 12 o'clock, and then she had to go back to school.
What day was it? Remember the date?
I can't remember now, but it was on the 18th of January, I remember.
January 18th, okay.
1918?
Yeah. January the 3rd of 1918.
January 3rd, 1918.
Mary wanted us to go home with her that night, and we did. We went home with her to stay all night, and we got down to the bottom. They called it the bottom. The highway wasn't fixed yet. We went this way, and something happened to the car that the people was taking us out, and they had to get out and fix it. So Dad and I thought we'd get out and we'd walk. And then when they got the car fixed, you know, they'd catch us. So we was going up the hill up there. We found a loaf of bread. Fresh loaf of bread laying in the middle of the road. Somebody had shopped and they lost. So we picked that up. And we thought, well, we'll have bread the rest of our life because we found a loaf of bread. And then they picked us up. Well, we stayed all night with my sister that night. And then the next day she had all his folks. They brought all of his folks out, and she had a big dinner for us the next day. And I think we got that little picture of Winfield and Florence and Everett Gleason, his folks. And then we went back that night and stayed with his folks. And then he had to go back to camp the next day. And then Paul Newkirk got me a pass because Dad was employed on the railroad. And he got me a pass, Grandpa Newkirk did. And I went and could go back with him as far as Kansas City. And Winfield and Florence went. And we went back as far as Kansas City with him, and he had to come on to the camp. And I went back home. And I stayed with his folks a little bit, and then I spent most of my time out at the farm with Mary.
When did you get to see him next?
When did I see him?
Uh-huh.
Well, I went to the camp and visited him a couple of times while I was at Lawton. And then I was there when the troop train pulled out, when he